From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change that we seek. And that's a quote from Barack Obama. I could not think of a more appropriate quote by an equally appropriate person to open the 47th annual IASA conference. The quote, because our theme for this conference is A World of Opportunity, Audiovisual Archives in the Digital Landscape, which implies change. And of course, President Obama, as we are in Washington, D.C., on the eve of an election that will see the end of his tenure as President of the United States, and history recording his legacy. It is also no coincidence that I quote the US President. The very building in which the conference will be taking place over the next few days is testimony to the rich legacy left to us by the various presidents previously of the United States. It's an absolute honor for me to be standing in this building, named after the 4th President of the United States, James Madison, regarded as the father of the Constitution and the last of the founding fathers to serve as president. Over and above the remarkable history of the Library of Congress, it has been my wish since I started my career as a radio archivist almost 30 years ago, to one day visit this institution that has had such a profound impact on the world of libraries and archives. A warm welcome to 2016 IASA conference, in particular to our host, David Mall, the Deputy Librarian of Congress, Mark Sweeney, Associate Librarian of the Library Services, Betsy Peterson, Director, American Folklife Center, Greg Luco, the Chief Motion Picture Broadcasting Recorded Sound Division, who all actively contributed towards this conference. A warm welcome to Andrea Kalas, President of EMEA and also our keynote speaker. It is my privilege to also extend a very, very warm welcome to previous IASA presidents and honorary members of IASA. Jerry Gibson, where are you? And of course, Dietrich Schüller. Thank you, Dietrich. We are very grateful that you made your way, both of you, to attend this conference and to honor us with your presence. Thank you so much. I also wish to thank the Library of Congress, and in particular, the newly appointed Librarian of Congress for hosting the conference. And as you probably know, Carla Hayden is the first woman and first African-American to lead the Library of Congress. I especially wish to thank the organizing committee. I already did that in our General Assembly, but I wish to do so again. Judith Gray, Kate Murray, Carl Fleischauer, Guha Shankar, Stephanie Smith, Megan McShay, Dave Walker, and Jean de Anna, who are staff of both the Library of Congress and the Smithsonian Institution. In addition, this conference would not have been possible without the effort of Jared McNeil and Thea Austin. Then a heartfelt welcome to all new student members. It is a brand new category of membership with IASA, and Judith told me that we have quite a few student members. So thank you for joining and really welcome to this conference. May I also just add that we've noted that many registrations of people who are not members of IASA as yet, and we really would like for you to talk to any one of us if you feel the need, and we really hope you have the need to join IASA, so that we can talk to you about the benefits of becoming an IASA. Just a little punt there from our side. But lastly, I really need to thank our sponsors for making this conference possible. Memnon, a Sony company, as the platinum sponsor for the conference. NOAA and CubeTech, both bronze sponsors. And then also our exhibiting sponsors, Gecko, TimeStep, and if I can just read it there. can't make it out, I'm sorry. George Blood, thank you so much, Bert. And all of this would not have been possible for the generous contribution by the Library of Congress as well. So thank you very much to all our sponsors. As Judith already had said, the exhibitors are in the room next door. They feel kind of lonely there, so in your tea time, coffee time, please go around, visit them, and talk to them. So the theme of this year's conference touches deeply on the James Truslow Adams American dream, and I've hinted at that in my presidential, although welcoming note in the program, that became the symbol of opportunity, prosperity, and success. The American dream was achieved through sacrifice, risk-taking, and hard work, all being part of the entrepreneurial spirit that became synonymous with America. Adams, in his book, The Epic of America, which was written in 1931, defined the American dream as that dream of a land in which life should be better and richer and fuller for everyone, with opportunity for each according to their ability of achievement or achievement. Could one, in this sense, then not draw a parallel between Adams's American dream of opportunity and the discovery of recorded sound, images and moving images, the establishment of radio and television, and the consequent inevitable growth of sound and audiovisual archives? With every pioneering development to record images, sound and moving images, came new opportunities to preserve and expose our collections to the world. Ensuring that our collections were meticulously catalogued, well preserved and secured in a physical sense, as well as in terms of the complex and tricky ownership rights associated with the content, was certainly not without risk and hard work. I believe that this pattern of archives being impacted by new technologies and maintaining a balance between safeguarding our collections and making them accessible has the ingredients of that trend. We have no choice but to take note of trends that are shaping the future of our world. Each technological innovation and the market's response to the innovations has the makings of a trend and the potential to take us forward, or, sadly in some cases, put us a step or two back. How many of us were not forced to preserve our audio collections on minidisc to save storage space? And how many of us had to fight the preservation of the preservation using MPEG-3 for the same reason? It is a miracle that our collections sometimes survive these ostensibly cost and storage reductions decisions. Dare I say, and I speak on personal experience, that EASA was a saving grace in many instances. Trends become discernible over time and give us an idea of what's happening in a particular field at any given point in time. Trends provide a view of the future and hints on how to prepare. As the sci-fi author William Gibson, who coined terms such as cyberspace already in the 1980s, long before anyone used it, said, the future is here already, it's just not evenly distributed. Is this not also the case for audiovisual archives and our collections in the digital landscape? We are already connected to our global markets, even though we may not have exposed them fully yet or explored them fully yet. Do we have a choice about not thinking more entrepreneurial about our work and the advantages and challenges the digital landscape offers to us? In occupying this niche market, we need to be up to date with the latest technology. We need to know what our constituency is wanting from us and how demands for access to information affects us in terms of offerings to our clients. An associate director of the reference department at the Library of Congress, one John L. Nolan, when writing in 1961 about the inclusion of audiovisuals as part of the library collections, noted that the fast-moving technological changes made projection of present trends. Can I just repeat that? Of fast-moving technological changes made projection of present trends in this area particularly hazardous. That was in 1961. Acknowledging that his postulation might just have been wishful thinking on his part, Nolan listed the trends then as 1. Greater production of audiovisual materials for educational and recreational use. According to Nolan, the audiovisual industry had doubled in the 1950 to 1960 period, and he predicted a doubling by the end of 1962. 2. An urgent need for trained personnel to handle the growing volume and variety of audiovisual materials, especially training in the technical aspects of handling audiovisual materials, but adding that far more important will be the need for imagination, initiative, and practical planning in this field. 3. The expansion of technological research and development to make possible greater centralization of service, greater simplicity in use, and lower cost. In other words, automation to permit a greater degree of use through self-service and through mass service. 4. The development of more systematic bibliographic coverage and methods of organizing audiovisual materials for use. 60 years later, we see that Nolan had a good grasp of the future and opportunities of the time. In a recent research survey done by the OCLC, the following trends were observed. Growth of especially audiovisual collections, growth of online catalogues, large-scale digitization models, and integration of once-separated special collections. We see the phenomenal growth of audiovisual collections on a daily basis. I do not need to expand on the vast impact social media and technology such as smartphones and sophisticated software are having on our collections. With this comes the shift towards more files and fewer physical holdings, especially in the case of born digital content, which of course has its own challenges. The current trend to digitize archive material increases access to previously unknown and unshareable materials, those hidden collections, and opens their potential for research and educational use. In addition, the usage and value of previously accessible materials have both increased as a result of greater demand for information. Online catalogues have become a trend, more secure and sophisticated than ever before in making audiovisual collections available to users. It is impossible not to think about ITN and its online catalogue called ITN Source as an example of a modern online catalogue containing more than 1 million hours of footage and growing at a rate of over 20 hours of digital content per day. Not only did ITN see the opportunity to make available and sell its collection online, but ITN also partnered with 24 of the world's most influential agencies, which includes, for instance, Reuters, and syndicates its own news footage to other broadcasters and producers. Since 2005, ITN has been a shareholder of the Espresso Group that provides digital content to primary schools in the UK and also international. Digitization dictated that we adapt our cataloging practices to focus on metadata frameworks and standards and begin thinking about the semantic web and the opportunities it offers. The generation of metadata is no longer solely in our domain. We are gradually becoming dependent on metadata generated by other sources. Annemieke de Jong wrote already in 2007 that more and more metadata on the materials that we maintain is being generated away from us, outside of the archive realm, outside of our research and control. This concerns metadata that is derived automatically, but also metadata that is put in by humans. De Jong predicted that professional catalogers may feel that these developments will cause them to lose a bit of their expertise, exclusiveness, and that they will have to share their job, their expertise with non-experts. They're bound to have to develop a few more important new focuses too, like maintaining the metadata quality in the production environment, doing quality checks, advocate the use of controlled metadata, help defining the algorithms for a user requirement point of view, and still bring in the higher semantics, controlling the information content and the context of digital audiovisual materials. The recognition that metadata is no longer the sole responsibility of the cataloger has brought with it opportunities such as crowdsourcing, the semantic web, automated tagging, and other mechanisms to involve the public, collectors, and other interest groups. The BBC and our very own Organising Knowledge Committee are instrumental in further exploring these opportunities. The prospects being yielded by the audiovisual digital landscape are enormous and allow us to create central repositories and stimulate collaboration and cooperation within and across borders to preserve and share content. Within the broadcasting arena, there is a greater demand for reuse and repurposing content, both to save production cost and increase revenue from content sales. We need to explore the training demands because, as Nolan observed, there is still an urgent need for trained archivists to handle the growing volume and variety of audiovisual materials. There's potential for partnerships with commercial entities, a concept once frowned upon, but a modern-day reality. To realize these opportunities may require remote access 24/7, 365 to meet our users' demand for instant access to our collections. This, in turn, implies building comprehensive metadata resources and optimizing the audiovisual resources for search and discovery, and will require investigations of encrypted media, secure websites, ethics, and many more aspects. Do we actually understand the strong hand that we've been dealt with? As Peter Kaufman so aptly argued in his paper, Assessing the Audiovisual Archive Market. Do we understand that our collections have become sought-after assets, whether we want to generate revenue or provide it for free? The ball, so to speak, is in our hands. Focal International had the following to say: our findings show that the trade in archives is an important part of the wider media economy, with content supplied by archives appearing in an ever-increasing range of outlets. The growing variety of consumer platforms for accessing short-form, long-tail content means that this key role will only grow in importance. Do we still experience our archives full of stuffy old clips of obscure events, only to be found in the off chance or wanted once off? Our archives have an inherent potential to become dynamic businesses. While the digital content economy has created an environment of user-generated content, and the online consumers challenge our instinct to create revenue for ourselves with the expectation that media content should be mostly for free, archives enjoying growing demand from businesses as well as the wider public. It is vital for us to be proactive in defining the future role of the archives as curators of content. We have new channels for content distribution, for instance, YouTube and Instagram. We have the opportunity to engage with new user groups. We have options in exploring technologies to enrich and optimize work processes and to allow for creative ways to access collections. A culture of innovation and entrepreneurial thinking is vital for exploring the possibilities of cooperation with our schools, our universities, our communities, our broadcasters, because, as Johan Orman had observed, for the first time our archives and our users are sharing the same information space. In closing, I want to quote John Hawking, Assistant Secretary General of the UN, who recently delivered the keynote address at the ICA Congress in Korea. Our collections connect past and future, problems to solutions, and people with people. Archives do not just document an explorable past, but they are a cherished heritage to build a more resilient future. I wish you a very, very successful conference, connecting with friends and colleagues, and exploring the opportunities that may benefit your archive. I have no doubt that you will find value in this conference. Welcome. Thank you. It is now my pleasure to welcome up to the podium David Ma, who has been for the past year a very capable acting librarian of the Congress. During the course of the past few days, we've heard so much about you, David, and only appreciation for your leadership in the interim period. So it's my pleasure to welcome you up to the podium.
Thank you very much for that very generous thank you and introduction of my tenure here. As you may know, I am honored to be serving as the Deputy Librarian of Congress. We do have a new librarian, a 14th Librarian of Congress, Dr. Carla Hayden, who was sworn in just 2 weeks ago. So on behalf of her and really the entire Library of Congress, I want to welcome all of you to the Library of Congress for this, I'm told, the 47th annual meeting of the International Association of Sound and Audiovisual Archives, or YASA. I also want to especially welcome your president, Ilse Assmann, who I'm thinking has probably traveled the farthest to join us here. And I'm very glad that after, I didn't quite do the math, was it 30 years, that you're finally able to come and visit the Library of Congress. And on that, I want to ask, for how many of you here is this the first visit to the Library of Congress? And I see many of my colleagues and former colleagues from the library here, so they don't count. Everybody else how many of you, this is the first visit to the Library of Congress? Wow, that's actually most of the room. And I'm delighted for one, because you are visiting the Library of Congress at this transitional moment for us. I'm a little surprised, though, given the long history that YALSA has had with the Library of Congress, the first president of the association being a staff member here, and then a president in the 1990s, also a staff member, and then 25 years later, we of course have several of our staff here who are serving. Judith, you heard from at the very beginning. So with that long connection to the library, I had hoped that many of you had been here before, but I'm just as delighted that you are here now for the conference. I just want a few quick remarks. We like to think of this library as a temple of learning, and for those of you who may have not, and obviously many of you have not been here, gone to the Jefferson Building across the street, you will see how beautiful it is. We like to think of it, you see the dome here in the picture here. We like to think of it as one of the most beautiful buildings in all of Washington, D.C., and it really is a temple to learning. But within that temple, there are several shrines, as we like to say, dedicated to sound and audiovisual recordings, and you know them very well. Our Motion Pictures Broadcasting and Recorded Sound Division is among the world's premier collections in sound and audiovisual materials. We also have the library's American Folklife Center, which is helping to co-sponsor this event. And the AFC, as we like to call it, has one of the largest archives in the world of ethnographic sounds and AV recordings, including the earliest known examples on wax cylinders, which is truly phenomenal. So we're very proud here at the library of both of these divisions. We're also very proud of our Packard campus. I see Greg sitting here over on the side. For those of you who might have the opportunity later this week, I hope you will enjoy that visit there. It's more formally known as the National Audiovisual Conservation Center, and it really is a spectacular facility. So I hope you will enjoy that visit. So we have these wonderful divisions. You know that we like to preserve sound recordings here at the Library of Congress, and I'd like to say that we do sound recordings and audiovisual materials, and I'd like to say that we do a pretty good job at doing that. We have a couple of other opportunities here, the National Sound Recording Registry, the National Film Registry, both of which that I had the privilege of adding materials to during my time as acting librarian, and it was really a thrill, and I'm glad that we get to do that here at the library. But we are the Library of Congress, so we have a few other things, books at the library, in fact. So we have books, we have physical objects, we have lots of materials, many of which are on display over in our Jefferson Building. I hope you'll take the opportunity to explore some of our exhibits, see our beautiful building, take a look at some of our materials. They're just a drop in the bucket, really, of one of the greatest collections in the world, 162 million items in our collection. And so during your time here, you will be spending a lot of time learning about the best possible way to move forward as an organization in this particular format, but I hope you will explore some of the other things we have to offer here at the library, and that you will be inspired to come back and visit us more and more, whether it be in person or really through our internet collections, and that you can take this and tell everybody around the world about it. So again, welcome on behalf of the library, and enjoy your conference here. Thank you. I believe these are for Dr. Hayden, and I will make sure they get to them. She, as I said, just started and has a very full schedule and apologizes she couldn't be here to welcome you formally.
And something for you.
Oh.
It's just a little something from South Africa.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, David. It's now my privilege to introduce Andrea Kalas to you. She's currently the president of AMIA. And can I just add, it's the second time she's president. And I think, as I said to her earlier this morning, I think it says a lot about her and it says a lot about AMIA. About AMIA that they wanted her back, and about her that she's willing to do it a second time. I think it speaks of strength of character. But she's also the vice president of the archives of the Paramount Pictures since 2009, and has worked as head of preservation at the British British Film Institute, created in co-production digital archiving systems for Discovery Communications, built an archive from scratch at the DreamWorks SKG, and preserved new reels at the UCLA Film and Television Archive. She also holds a master's from the UCLA in film history. Therefore, I don't have to say anything further about Andrea's experience in preserving film and about her the opportunities that she saw there. She's well known for the preservation work and is well known as being visionary in our outlook of today's archives. So her paper today, Move into the Middle, Digital Archiving 2016, I'm sure will set the tone for this conference. Andrea, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Ilse. Thank you so much, all of you, for allowing me to address you here today. I see a few familiar faces out there from AMIA and some of the organizations I've been privileged to work with over the years, including the Library of Congress. Thank you for hosting this as well. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here to represent the Association of Moving Image Archivists, which I will talk about a minute or two, but really I'm here as myself, as a person who's been involved with archiving over the years. So I do want to take the opportunity to plug our little organization, the Association of Moving Image Archivists. What I'm showing you are a set of GIFs that we've created recently to just sort of explain, I think, as visually as we can, what the Association of Moving Image Archivists really is. And what you're seeing is one of our members with some of the collections that she looks after. This is actually a home movie collection from a very prominent African American who donated his materials to UCLA, and you see him here talking with Lena Horne. That's one kind of archivist and her collection. Another is Angela Schmidt from the Alaska Film Archives and some silent documentary footage she looks after. The Bay Area TV Archive, and Alex Chernian has an incredible collection of some of the Black Power movement's materials. Ted from Coca-Cola has done an enormous amount of work with actually caring for all of the commercials that Coca-Cola has made over the years. Or Brent from NYU, who also looks after some really amazingly powerful material news footage of the early AIDS movement. And this is someone I work with, Mickey, who actually had to do some really forensic work to actually restore the images that were on LTO tapes that were previously unrestorable until she came into the picture. So our big event is coming up in November, our annual conference. If you've never been to an AMIA conference, I welcome you and encourage you to come. There's an enormous amount of different kinds of people, as you saw from the GIFs, that come to that conference. And we have screenings and presentations and committee meetings, all sorts of fun to be had by all archivists, so I appreciate it. We also do something called The Real Thing. We do it at the conference, and we do it several other times during the year. It's basically a really well-curated presentation of sort of the latest and greatest in a lot of film restoration, but also archival technology dealing with moving images. Michael Friend and Grover Crisp, who are both at Sony Pictures, have been doing this for 20 years, I believe. An amazing contribution to the field, really. So if you can find one of those near you, I think there's one in Amsterdam, actually, next year. So we also do something called Digital Asset Symposium. We've been doing this for like the past 3 or 4 years. We had one in New York last May. We'll do another one in May in New York again. We're hoping to do one in Los Angeles as well. It's a focused, day-long, single-session discussion, really, of what people are doing with different systems of digital asset management and what all those things that might mean. And they've been really, really fruitful and exploring lots of different things from within sort of the entertainment world, but outside of that as well, from all sorts of, because all sorts of people, of course, have to deal with moving images. And then we also just recently had a projection workshop for those theaters that still project 35 millimeter film and want to make sure that they're taking care of those as well as possible. We worked with Kodak and the Film Foundation and the Alamo Drafthouse to sponsor this 3-day-long conference where projectionists came in and figured out how to make sure that the last few remaining 35 millimeter prints we have are cared for well. So, thank you for letting me plug AMIA. Thank you very much. So, move into the middle. You know, it may not be the best title ever, but I think what I was trying to really get at by saying that was that I think that archivists right now are in the middle, whether we like it or not, between sort of what I see as the maturation of both technology and knowledge about technology, and the fragility of the artifacts that we are increasingly have to care for, especially the digitally born ones. You know, that's what you see there is Billy Wilder looking out of the porthole on the set of Sunset Boulevard. And I just love this photo because he's directing the movie, and yet he looks like he's sort of been left out of there. And so that's sort of, a sort of metaphor for sometimes how I feel as an archivist. It's my job, it's my responsibility, it's my head, it's my, you know, the buck stops with me, but sometimes I have to just sort of watch it happen before me at the same time. You know, this film, Sunset Boulevard, is one of the reasons I'm definitely an archivist at Paramount Pictures now, and probably a film archivist at all. And it's, you know, and we had the chance to restore that film, and it was actually the Library of Congress that had an original vintage print that we borrowed that was critical to that restoration. So I have to thank you for that because it was an amazing part of that. But throughout the years, whether I've been preserving newsreels on 35 millimeter in early stages of my career at UCLA Film and TV Archive, or when I moved on to try to make research easier at the Research and Study Center at the UCLA Film and TV Archive by collecting up closed caption text from television news shows into a really early database. Whether I had to figure out how, before there was really much bandwidth at all with Discovery, to bring footage electronically back to headquarters from the far stretches of the world, or now where we're really focused within Paramount Pictures on the concept of digitally preserving feature films. I've always seen technology through the lens of archiving, of preservation, of access. And I think that right now, I feel within the world of digital archiving, we're 20 to 30 years in. It's not new anymore. We're not scratching our heads wondering how we're going to digitize. We're there, we are doing it every day. And so it seems to me it's important to sort of think, what does that mean? Now that we are in it, really, we are here 20, 30 years in, what's our role? What's our responsibility? So here are two sort of divergent concepts of a digital archive. On the top is the definition that comes from OAIS, consisting of an organization of people and systems that accepted the responsibility to preserve information and make it available for a designated community. A useful definition, a very useful definition, especially I think when with the concept of people and systems together. That's a really important one. I think that a lot of people sometimes forget. It's as if the technology works by itself. And the other is a recently available online cloud-based thing that you can put your digitally born materials that you've shot yourself into something that's called a digital video archive, DVA. So two very different ideas of what a digital archive is. One that is, just the beginning of different standards and ways of actually approaching a really structured way of thinking about preserving and providing access to important materials. And the other is really kind of a shelf that hopefully will be around for a little while. We don't know. This is a startup company. It's been around, I think, for maybe 6 months. What will be it in the future? So I think it's an important thing to show that this is where we are in the world, where lots of people are thinking about these definitions in different ways. This is kind of what our archive looks like at Paramount a little bit. This is a way that we have to think in order to really strongly think about the technical metadata, really, that we need to have to manage the feature films within our own infrastructure. And the below text is just all sorts of words that go flying around the office pretty much every day. But as you can see, this kind of very strong structuring of our basic file naming convention is really what all this is. Has to take into what the title of the film is, the current aspect ratio of this is, whether it was cut for a particular territory, and if it even actually was cut for a ratings reason or not. What resolution is it? Where did it come from? Where was it created, which is an important part of the process as well. And I know that this kind of intense work to systematize, to really think about how our assets work in systems is incredibly important because we need to work with technology. But within the OAIS definition, the other definitely part of this equation is the great people that I work with every day. The amazing people that challenge each other constantly when we come up with a new definition for talking about things. When somebody who has had a lot of system experience but not much photochemical experience, for example, will really push on someone to say, why do you need to call that black and white interpositive a fine grain? Really? Is anybody going to know what that means in the future? And the arguments will go on there forever. We work really hard to think about not only the technical metadata that we do, but the content that we're preserving and how we're preserving that and making that effective. So that's an important part of who we are. As we are 20, 30 years in, I think the default perceptions of archivists still exist outside of us and maybe inside of us sometimes too. And it's difficult not to sometimes when we're to be forward thinking when we're dealing with backlogs with subcategories of backlogs, as I have myself, and deterioration issues, legacy systems that will not probably become anything other than legacy systems for years to come, but have to be integrated into your latest and greatest digital infrastructure, budget justifications and endless PowerPoints to try and explain what the risk is if you don't do something now. It's hard to be forward thinking with all that around us all the time. And it's even more hard when this quote was from a recent article on digital asset management, which really compares us to coal miners. Thank you very much. So, it is hard to move beyond that perception and keep that in mind. But, I kind of think that's okay in a way, because that is part of who we are. So, mass digitization, a huge impact, obviously, on anybody that's calling themselves a librarian or an archivist. 100 million books, over 100 million books have been digitized. I think, and maybe that somebody, oh no, there's no more book people in the room anymore. But I believe, and please correct me if anybody knows this is right or wrong, I think every book before 1800 is now been digitized, something like that. And these are publicly searched. Is that right? Is that wrong? Somebody say something? By the way, anytime anybody wants to interrupt me and correct me or ask me questions, they're more than welcome to. I don't have to just keep talking. But the whole idea is to make these things publicly searchable online. That is the idea of this digitization. And that is fantastic. It is amazing. It has made people be able to do so much more kinds of research all over the world and be able to really, sort of do things from distances that they were never able to do before. I mean, that kind of access is incredible. And within moving images, within a very short time, I went from saying things like, one day we'll be able to go on the internet and we'll be able to actually click on something and watch and listen at the same time, to actually being able to manage that, having that be a major part of what Paramount Pictures does every day, is to move our content on to be streamed all over the world. This quote here, update, cat bombs more prevalent than previously thought, which I just loved, is from an article from The Atlantic, a guy who writes a lot about technology, who had picked up on a researcher's paper on the fact that there was, in fact, in this 16th century manuscript, what looked like a cat with a bomb on its back, and actually had found more than one cat with a bomb on its back. And to me, it just sort of articulates that, yeah, we have all this stuff online, we have researchers looking into this stuff, but we also have, the clickbait universe as well, who is going to pick up on this and maybe trivialize what was a really important piece of research, or maybe talk about this in ways that had nothing to do with what the original, fundraising proposal said about, scanning these manuscripts and how critical they were. But that exists, and that's part of our world now. We can't go back from it. Maybe we will mature beyond clickbait land. That would be lovely. I would love to think about a world where we did. Maybe this is just a transition we're going through right now, but it's here, and it's part of what happens when we make things accessible and out there. And the other thing I think that happens when we digitize things, whether it's books or whether it's moving images, is that they're not what they used to be anymore. I mean, even though the content is there, the way that we work with them does obviously change. If we are providing access to moving images online, we don't necessarily have to have several different flatbed editors for which we can play back 16mm and 35mm prints, if those things are available online. So that skill and that understanding of how that works is going to change. I mean, obviously, as we look, if you look at any kind of job descriptions that are out there today, coding, knowing some kind of Python scripting or other kind of scripting is a regular part of a digital archivist job description now. That wasn't around anymore. Our jobs are changing. That's part of what we're doing. And so just trying to think of that, the content without the technology that surrounds it, is we just can't do it anymore. It's just, it's here. But within that, I think, what's also happening is, we do have some really incredibly deep and useful skills as archivists, and we need to remember that always. I think this little quote here is another recent article on, data mining, big data, data science, call it what you will, and this concept of dark data, which I just love, which is roughly translated, I think, unstructured data. What they were saying in this article is that, hey, this metadata thing might be useful. That there might be something to that, actually having some structured data in there. And they're actually talking about, so many people actually put things into dark data. And by dark, most of the time I think they're talking about just, maybe geospatial data or, call phone metadata, things like that. But they're also saying, oh, wow, people actually have emails and files that they put into systems. It's all a little scary, but anyway, because this is all about the Internet of Things. This is the new thing where, your refrigerator will tell you you're out of milk and things like that. But, that within that, what they're saying is that there is this stuff that is actually structured that can be useful to us. And I have this sort of feeling that people in these fields of new data science are, occasionally they look over at archivists or librarians and go, hey, they might have actually had something when they were talking about how important it is to structure data. So we shouldn't forget that. We've done such great work in this area, and it's so important and so critical, I think, not only to sort of these emerging kinds of slightly dodgy, in my opinion, technologies, but also because in order to manage our own collections within that new technology, we need to be firm on structured data. I will just sort of say that. The other thing is we've always had some really cool stuff within our own collections. And I think it's really, and that's one thing about the OAS description I would have loved to have seen, people, systems, and cool stuff. Because I think actually that's another really important part of who we are as archivists, is we've always cared for collections, for material. We have incredible knowledge about those collections, deep and passionate about those collections most of the time as well. An incredible resource, in my opinion, for the rest of the world. Whether it's feature films or whether it's menus at the Los Angeles Library, incredible treasure trove of materials. And it's easy, I think, sometimes to forget about that when we're dealing with metadata standards or other kinds of file format standards, things like that. The collections, they're at the center of it. That's why we're in this field to begin with. So just another thing I think that we're really good at is really focusing on what that resource is and why it's important. We decided to help acquire something. We decided to write a collection profile on it. We decided that this collection took a certain priority over others. Those are all skills that we have as archivists. Another quote from a recent article about digital asset management system, and this is something that is near and dear to my heart too, which is this concept I call asset transparency, which is a horrible phrase. I need to come up with another one. But the idea is that when we were at Paramount, when we were building our digital preservation system, a key philosophical, foundational philosophy was that we needed to build a system that we could take all of the assets, and by that I mean each individual file that makes up the picture of a feature film and each individual WAV file that makes up the track that go along that feature film, the video files that represent the trailer, the JPEGs that represent all of the photographic stills, all those assets and all their metadata, and we need to be able to move them out of the current digital asset management system and the infrastructure we have now and into something else, because I know the software will go away, I know the hardware will change. Those are the things I know the most. What I need to do is maintain the longevity and the permanence of the assets. And so in order to do that, I think it's really important to know the machine, which is know what your system is made out of, what are its bits and pieces. I think that is something that we need to know better. I mean, within my career, I've seen the change from when you had everyone had their own data storage system, their own tape library or their set of servers they had in a basement or they had someplace on their facility, to now moving to a lot of people using cloud-based infrastructures. And what does that mean? It means different technology roles change. This concept of DevOps, development operations, is a new sort of catch-all job description for many people that work in different technology fields. And what it means is they have to do hardware and software together. Whereas it used to be very, very segregated across, you had system administrations, you had software developers, you had analysts. It was very segregated. Now everything's getting smushed together. It's important to know that because that you're going to need to interact with those people as you go. So knowing what you have now, and also specifically, like for example, at Paramount, not only do I have my digital asset management system, I am absolutely dependent on other databases within the studio to provide me with key metadata about my assets. Whether it's, there is a title database, for example, that I must interact with. There is a rights database that I must interact with. So knowing about those systems and their fragility, because often there is that, and they're legacy systems, they may not be replaced for a while, what information I need is also part of my job. So I think that's another, but I think, again, I think we have the skills for that because I think naturally we do see, because we've been working so hard on really collecting and documenting collections, we can see in our heads what things we need from different places. So I think we have the skills to do that. So, distract tech, this is my phrase. I won't patent it or anything, but there is this thing called ad tech and martech. I don't know if you've come across this concept, but really what that means is that advertisers and marketers are, of course, becoming really savvy about how to make sure you're getting as many things sold to you as possible whenever you interact with the interwebs or anything connected to it. And they, are in the data science realm. They are in trying to make sure that whatever you're, buying is connected to something you've bought before, all this kind of stuff. And this quote is, I think, really apt, which is somebody sort of starting to complain that there's really not a lot of substance there. And it does. I think, in some cases there is some really good probably programming behind it, but a lot of it is marketing to themselves, where our company is going to save all your, to solve all your advertising and marketing problems. And I just put this sort of hashtag, we've always had substance, which is, this is again what we have as archivists, is we have the collections, we have the content, we have the substance, that it's easy, I think, to get caught up in the fact that if we have digitized a lot of materials, we feel, we must get, push something out via Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat or something into the universe every day. It's an important part of getting the word out there about our digital collections. And maybe that's a great idea, maybe that isn't, I don't know. But I think it can be, it could potentially be distracting too from our mission, in my opinion. That just getting the word out our collections and spending an enormous amount of time doing it without thinking about why could carry some risk. Just a thought. This phrase, iTunes metadata decimation, is actually a quote from a friend of mine who was talking about how they've had iTunes for, a decade or so, or more, and have purchased a lot of music, and then, and kept a very good, he's a very good personal archivist, very good care of his iTunes library over time, and then decided to go to the iCloud and pushed his library up there, and lo and behold, new versions of music actually replaced the ones that he had originally purchased. Now, in iTunes' mind, well, you still have the music. What's your problem? But, this is, I think, a key and an interesting concept to keep in mind as archivists, right? Which is that I can see a world where let's say, you know, Paramount Pictures, I don't know, is bought up by, I don't know, a Chinese studio. That could happen. And that Chinese studio has actually digitized a bunch of Paramount Pictures on their own for some reason over time. And they just want to merge our libraries. Why not, right? It's no big deal. Well, but I've spent, you know, most of my time making sure that when I have Saturday Night Fever, I know it's Saturday Night Fever. I know that I have captured the best possible resolution of that image, that I know that both technical and descriptive metadata is as accurate as possible, that I've spent this time doing it, and I don't want to lose that. And that's an important key thing. And it's a concept of provenance. And I think it is going to be much more important for us to find ways of authenticating and verifying and making sure that we have actual information about different versions of assets and materials as we go forward. I was talking to Bert a little bit before about law enforcement and the obvious need for evidentiary provenance. So this is, you know, to me, I have the tough girl up there because nobody's going to take my Saturday Night Fever away from me. You know, that is my job, to make sure that Saturday Night Fever exists in the best possible way. Or more, perhaps, you know, a film like Nebraska, which was digitally shot, and doesn't have a chance for me to go back to some sort of analog provenance if I need to. So this to me, you know, this is one of our responsibilities, as far as I see it, in the digital realm, is to make sure that we are the keepers of the real stuff. We're really good at that, and we shouldn't lose that just because it's digital. And Ilse, you were talking about crowdsourcing and other kinds of, you know, that kind of interaction with that, and I think that none of that is wrong or off, but it's still our job in the end to keep that provenance and that authority and that verification, in my opinion. This is a slide I stole from my colleague Nicola Mazzanti. Some of you know him. He's never afraid to be very strident. And this is a slide that just really was talking about within, you know, as many of you know, within film archives, there is a strong and interesting debate about digital versus photochemical and preservation. And this was his way of saying within Europe that if we didn't embrace the concept of, if there wasn't an embrace of digital preservation within cinema culture, that there would be a loss of investment within archives. And so I think, and to me, that's fine. I think either side of this debate, to be strident and to be opinionated, is perfectly well within our rights, and we should be. And again, our job as archivists and as knowledge keepers of how to maintain these materials. This is pizza in a plastic container that is meant to last forever. And I just love the idea of permanent pizza. You know, and I think this is another really difficult thing for us to start to face when we do have so much to archive now. Out, you know, within each one of our remits, whether it's, you know, my remit is to take care of materials created by Paramount Pictures so that the rest of the studio can really use it. You know, other people have the remit to collect things for a particular region of the United States, for the people that are in that region to use it. Within our own remits, what is too much? I don't, for example, right now, collect any Paramount Twitter feeds. Should I? Maybe. I don't know. You know, another discussion. I don't collect every single version of a work-in-progress film before it's completed. Should I? Maybe. I don't know. There are millions of them. And these are just two quotes which are, you know, by very, very smart people trying to figure out definitions for digital archive and for preservation, which show that all smart people, like everyone in this room, and are really grappling with these ideas of what a digital archive is, by either expanding the concept, like adding value to people's lives, by increasing their understanding and appreciation of the past. That's fantastic, but what's step one from there? It could be anything. Or a really great article that really sort of just outlined the different definitions of digital archive, of digital preservation that exist out there. So we're all grappling with these definitions because I think we're grappling with what we're actually going to preserve, and not even the how and the how much, but what. So those are all the things I think we have in front of us now that we're 20 to 30 years into this whole digital archive thing. But I think that we as a field, those of us within EMEA, those of us within YAZA and other archival organizations, especially dealing with moving images, as they are going to be a critical part of how we think about culture, history, education, every part of our lives. We have the skills, and I think it's an exciting time, and I'm happy to be part of it. Thanks very much.
Any questions for Andrea? Any comments?
Over here. Over there. Yeah.
Oh, George over there.
Did you have any difficulty getting the rights for the images you used in your presentation?
They are all rights. They are all from Paramount Pictures, except for the pizza one.
Can we assume from your pizza example that there is a connection between preservation of pizza, sealing it in, that digitization of images cuts out the taste of the original?
I think you can use that metaphor anywhere you want. I think to why I was using that metaphor was to say, I like pizza to eat. I don't like it to last very long, and that doesn't taste as good after a while. I don't see the point of keeping pizza in plastic for a long time. That's really what I meant, is that there may be more things than we really do need to archive, is really what I'm suggesting. That there is so much out there that the idea of actually trying to figure out what to archive that is digitally born is challenging. And some of it we may be preserving some pizza erroneously, accidentally, possibly. So that's what I'm trying to communicate.
A real question, I'm sorry.
No.
How much of the original source material, you made reference to an original fine grain print for one of the first items that you became interested in and did restoration work on. How much of the original source material of these original prints should be preserved or are being preserved once they have been digitized?
I'll try to repeat that just so everybody can hear your question, okay? Sure. And if I go wrong, just, you can throw things at me. He's asked, the question was in reference to a comment I made about fine grains, which is, if you don't know, an intermediate element for film duplication. It's not the original negative, it's the next generation up. How many of those things should be preserved? In my opinion, if you've got film right now, you should keep it as long as you can. So those original materials, especially something like a fine grain, should be preserved in the best possible way, the best possible environment, as long as possible. Those original materials. We do scan material at the best, highest quality all the time. We don't throw the film out afterwards, in answer to your question. I hope, does that answer your question?
Yes, there are recommended standards, or there are standards and recommendations that will help most film materials, even nitrate, last for a generation, first centuries if stored under proper conditions.
And I have adopted those. I agree with them.
I'm sure you're aware of it.
Chris?
Hi, thanks, Andrew.
Hi, Chris. Sure.
So you said you were here representing yourself, but I'm going to put you on the spot, especially we have two presidents of EMEA and IASA here that have to do it. So I'm just curious, you talked a lot about, you know, the evolving skill set and the role of the archivist. I'd love to hear how EMEA and IASA are addressing the need for this evolving skill set and what your thoughts on how we move forward there.
Well, I'll go first and then.
You go for
Okay.
it.
I think that, you know, the events like Digital Asset Symposium are strongly focused on trying to bring in new kinds of members, new kinds of skill sets into the organization. I think workshops that happen before the session, including Hack Day and other kinds of sessions. There's a digital preservation stream at this year's conference. I think trying to encourage different kinds of workshops and skill sets there. Actually, our own education committee, which comes out of a lot of the student memberships, has been amazing on their own, letting each other know about new jobs and new kinds of training and events and things like that. So I think, and EMEA has had a strong scholarship program for a really long time, and that's been, I think, a really critical part of having students come in and come back to the organization after they've graduated and continuing their career and bringing new ideas into things. So that's my EMEA answer.
From IASA's point of view, we've recognized that training is extremely critical. And we've set up a task force under the leadership of Will Prentice over here. Well, I think you need to just maybe stand up. Because this task force is really very critical for us to build the framework on where we need to go. And anybody who's interested in joining Will within that task force is really welcome to contact him. We've just launched it. And that is apart from our regular training program where we go out, do workshops as well. We've initiated a new student membership. And I'm glad to say that there's a couple of students that have registered already or become members already. But we've recognized that we actually need to move forward and we need to be far more proactive than we've ever been. Apart from that, as you know already, our technical committee is extremely productive in publishing the standards, so to speak. The first one was on the ethical standards for audiovisual objects, and then came the TCO4, which was our standards for sound objects. We also published the storage, how to store our objects, and now we're busy working on the video one. So Lars and his team there is instrumental in doing that, and I think it's all trying to incorporate us and stay with the trends that we currently see in the world. Okay.
You spoke about the kind of the standard archival. Thank you. You spoke earlier on your slide about having a relationship with designated communities as part of your responsibility as archivists. And I wonder if you could just kind of address that in your particular case. Who are your designated user communities as you think of them, and how do you interrelate with them?
At Paramount.
Yes.
At Paramount, our designated community is Paramount. I mean, we are a corporate archive, right? Our job is to preserve those materials for people to sell them for airlines or for Netflix or for Blu-rays or however they want to distribute them. That's our job. You know, we do take very seriously the fact that another sort of designated community that's not necessarily what we get paid for is people that are interested in film history and interested in the history of film. And we do try to work with that as much as possible as what we can do. But first and foremost, we're a corporate archive. I think, you know, the other thing is about that phrase, designated communities, too, is that even though that might have been, I think that changes now when you digitize things and put things online, right? So that what you actually potentially got funding for, like I might have gotten funding for, you know, preserving something for a a Blu-ray sale. Well, now, Paramount actually does have a YouTube channel called the Paramount Vault. That might be there. That's a different designated community. Similar to somebody who gets funding for educational use of a particular news clip or something, but then it gets, sort of distributed faster. Our designated communities shift and change, and so I don't, again, that phrase, even though it's from OAIS, is useful because it's true. We always have our immediate responsibility as a repository, but I think it's shifting and changing.
Hi, thank you very much for a great presentation.
Thank you.
My question is regarding to your file name standards. That's quite a long file name standard, and so it's sort of like a two-pronged question is, what drove your decision to include all of those elements in the file name? And, how long, were there other people involved in that, and how long did it take you to get people to agree?
It's an excellent question, and it really speaks to the heart of sort of what we do daily, because actually we, in the archive group, argued against file names at all. We wanted everybody to just use our attributes. We'd spent a long time using them and within our asset management system. And what do you need file names? We put everything in here, and we keep it constantly refreshed and updated. So, we didn't have 3D yesterday, but now we do. So the things that we didn't call 2D are now called 2D. We keep that constantly updated. So we were a little offended when our colleagues in other departments, they were like, well, yeah, but we have to send these files all over the place. And we can't actually ensure that metadata follows that file all the time. And there are efforts right now to try to, correct that. But the file name was, it's like reading the spine on a book, really. It's the sort of equivalent of that for people. One-stop shopping. And how they can read that, I really don't know, but they do. And so, but the other part of your question is absolutely part of that, is that we're not an island in the archive. We work with the people that are in our mastering group and our distribution group all the time. So, and we have weekly change management meetings, and that's a critical part of the development and implementation of any digital archive, in my opinion, is stakeholder change management meetings. So you are all agreeing on it, because you don't go anywhere if you don't do that. Any other? Well, thanks again, Ilse, and thanks everyone for your time.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.